Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think that we will begin. Welcome to Eckstein Hall and Marquette University Law School, specifically to our Lubar Center, whether you are here with us in person or whether you are attending or viewing this online. My name is Joseph Kearney, and it's a great privilege for me as Dean of the Law School to greet you. This is, or soon will be, a conversation about top priority issues of environmental policy. Our guests are Preston Cole, the Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, or DNR, and Deborah Shore, the Regional Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 5 in Chicago. As many of you know, EPA Region 5 includes Wisconsin. Professor David Strifling, who will moderate, suggested that for a couple of reasons, it might be helpful for me to provide an introduction to today's event. So that will explain or account for these first 5 minutes or so. Through our Lubar Center and otherwise, we offer any number of programs engaging not just the law school and the rest of Marquette University, but more generally, intelligent citizens in this region. That's you. To be sure, there is a greater number of topics than we can cover, so it may be appropriate to relate the reasons for our focus on today's topic. Here's the basic legal context. During the founding era of environmental law, in enacting statutes in the early 1970s, such as the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and many others, Congress created a model of what might be called cooperative federalism. This framework requires a high degree of interaction and cooperation between federal and state regulators. Most succinctly, our most important environmental laws are statutes enacted by the federal government, but largely implemented by the states, with oversight and guidance from the federal EPA. This regulatory model works best, as you would imagine, when there are interaction and close collaboration between the offices or agencies that, for example, our two guests direct. So, on all of today's pressing questions of environmental policy, climate change, environmental justice, air and water quality, safe drinking water, the regulation of the forever chemicals known as Pfas, the EPA and the Wisconsin DNR must lead. It's no hyperbole to say that we have with us today two of the most important actors in setting environmental policy in Wisconsin, true leaders. These matters are of particular importance to us here at the law school, indeed to all of us at Marquette University. Our president, Dr. Michael Lovell, has charged all areas of the university to engage with helping to solve the world's water problems. Here at the law school, we have placed increased emphasis on water and the environment. In particular, in 2015, we appointed David Strifling, a Marquette engineer with law degrees from Marquette and Harvard, as director of our Water Law and Policy Initiative. The effort has been to position the law school, and indeed the entire university, as a leading center for the exploration of water law and policy issues. Part of the Water Law and Policy Initiative's mission is public education, as reflected in the longer name of the Lubar Center, the Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. Toward that end, in the past couple of years, the law school has hosted any number of events related to water and environmental law. Today, we add to that list in welcoming Secretary Preston Cole and Regional Administrator Deborah Shore. Secretary Cole is a distinguished longtime public servant. He has held a variety of posts with the City of Milwaukee, the City of St. Louis, and the Missouri Department of Conservation before his appointment by Governor Evers to his current role leading the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. He has a degree in forestry from the University of Missouri, and for a fun as well as impressive fact, he is a member of the Milwaukee Business Journal Hall of Fame. With him today, with us, is EPA Regional Administrator Deborah Shore. Before her appointment to this role by President Biden, she served as an elected member of the Board of Commissioners of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, a large and important agency. A native Chicagoan, I won't include any fun fact until I learn the neighborhood after the program. Administrator Shore is also an award-winning author and holds degrees from Goucher College in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins University, and Chicago's Columbia College. We are very grateful to both Secretary Cole and Administrator Shore for being with us today. So that's my contribution, our introduction, and I will hand things over to Professor Strifling to moderate today's conversation. Please join me in welcoming to Marquette Law School's Lubar Center, DNR Secretary Preston Cole, and EPA Regional Administrator Deborah Shore.
Thank you, Dean Kearney, and thank you, Regional Administrator Shore and Secretary Cole, for being here. This is a program that we've been trying to offer for a long time now, so I'm very grateful for you to be here with us today. So Dean Kearney listed some of the many high-priority issues that DNR and EPA face on a daily basis: climate change, Pfas, environmental justice. I thought I'd start by asking, is there one of those that is top of mind for your agency on a day-to-day basis? What keeps you up at night or worries you the most? Secretary Cole, I could start with you.
Well, we certainly have a myriad of issues confronting us here in the state of Wisconsin and certainly in this region. But first, let me say that, I've been in this room several times, and we have something special in Milwaukee, and it's because of the Marquette Law School and Policy Initiative. And certainly with the work that they do at the Water Council, and of course the School of Freshwater Sciences begins to use that three-legged stool to talk about the advent of clean water and research and the economy around water. So I'm happy to be here. And answering the question, it's what's top of mind for us. Certainly it's climate change, environmental justice, public health and safety, outdoor recreation, and I'll get into that a little bit in terms of how outdoor recreation, an $18 billion industry, can be sidelined because of lack of clean water or PFAS in our water, and lead laterals in homes and cities, towns, and villages. Certainly when we landed, Governor Evers stuck a stake in the ground and said, it's got to be clean water for all that we lead with. And so that, along with service excellence, how we interact with the public, businesses, university systems, and researchers, becomes part and parcel to our calling card of delivering on our promise for environmental protections and an economy derived from clean water and clean air. Thank you.
Regional Administrator.
I think you will see and are seeing out of the Biden-Harris administration a much more muscular, assertive environmental protection agency, certainly addressing climate change and advancing equity and justice are at the very top of a list of priorities. But just below them and included in our priorities are restoring that foundational commitment to enforcement based on science and the law, the commitment to restoring scientific integrity, and to supporting the workforce. And that is interwoven in all that we're doing.
So we've mentioned PFAS a couple of times already, and the concern about these forever chemicals seems to be growing every day in Wisconsin and elsewhere. And there's been some grumbling, I think it's fair to say, about EPA's delay in promulgating national standards for PFAS. Can you tell us a little bit about what EPA is doing? I saw just this morning that there was a release of some new health advisory limits for PFAS.
Thank you for the question. And indeed, just this morning, headquarters, Office of Water, made an announcement of a new interim health advisory for 4 of the chemicals that are part of this large suite that we refer to as PFAS, that includes numerous chemicals. This is not regulatory, not an enforcement measure, but a health advisory that lowers the levels that we think are protective of human health by orders of magnitude more than we've seen before. It's taking time, it's true, but science takes time. And we're issuing this new health advisory today because the science has changed. We've learned a lot more since the last health advisory was issued in 2016. We're on a path to, by the end of this year, have some new proposals for regulations that may go into rulemaking in 2023. And there are a number of other measures that are underway that we've issued a PFAS roadmap. All of this is available on the EPA's websites. And we're working closely with our partners in states and municipalities to, the first step through this health advisory is to find out, to do research, to take samples, and to test our water sources all over the country to see what the levels are in our public water treatment facilities, in wells, and so on. Because we've got to base our actions on sound information. Then we need to find the source and try to restrict these chemicals at their source through a variety of measures. And we can take action by installing treatment technologies at public water utilities. The Biden administration has allocated $1 billion more a year to assist especially underserved communities in taking action when it's warranted. And that's on top of about $7 billion in various drinking water and state revolving loan funds that can be addressed to emerging contaminants, which are these PFAS. I wish sometimes we could act sooner, but we want to make sure that the science is there to undergird any decisions and actions.
Secretary Cole, I want to turn to you because one thing that we're seeing in the absence of a binding national standard is that the states are taking action. And so DNR recently proposed and the Natural Resources Board approved new standards for PFAS in drinking water and surface water. And the specter that had sort of been hanging over this was what was the legislature going to do with those standards. And this week we found out the legislature is going to let them go into effect, but reserve the right to suspend them depending on how DNR implements them. And I'm wondering what your reaction to that news is.
Well, certainly they're going to keep an eye on it, seemingly, which is okay. You know, the long and short of the rulemaking processes that the department goes through is just part of the history of rulemaking for those forestry, fisheries, and wildlife, certainly air and water. And the adoption of these rules have become seminal for us to be able to, again, protect the human health. And so once that review period is over, I'll be able to sign a document and it will show up on the Wisconsin Administrative Register. In earnest, the rules will go into effect a month after that publication. We will begin that work in earnest. Interesting, you should know that the Natural Resources Board approved adoption regulating PFOA and PFAS in public drinking water and surface water. However, the Natural Resources Board did not approve adoption of rules to set standards for PFOA and PFAS in groundwater. And so that being said, we're evaluating those options and will initiate a new rulemaking process to set standards for these substances. Wisconsin has a robust groundwater law. This is the law that we point to that subsequently removes and has removed from the landscape benzene, toluene, atrazine, many different chemicals that harm us. We believe that groundwater law is going to be pivotal for us to protect the human health associated with finding PFOA and PFAS around the state of Wisconsin. So I'm happy to say we're back in the game and we're going to, again, deliver on our promise for clean water.
Can you share with us about how many sites DNR is actively investigating for PFAS contamination?
Absolutely. We are currently, on average, about 97 sites around the state of Wisconsin. And for us, we know that these chemicals harm us as people. These chemicals, lay in our fatty cells and do damage to us. And so the seriousness of it all is paramount. And so I rely on the Department of Health Sciences to advise us accordingly as to what those levels should be. Consequently, we know that our economy in Wisconsin is tied to clean water. We have an $18 billion outdoor recreation economy in jeopardy. So whether you fish or hunt or get out on our lakes, you know that our individuals are going to be in Marinette, Peshtigo, La Crosse. All of these economies this summer are hoping that people show up in their cities, towns, and villages so that they can get on the water and drink the water and fish and enjoy all that Wisconsin has to offer. I worry about our outdoor natural resources, that nature-based economy, and the communities that are encumbered by PFAS in their drinking water. Housing choices, we know that people are looking around the country to find a place to put a new stake in the ground. California is moving east, and East Coasters moving to California or the middle part of the country. Everybody's house is for sale. So for communities, of those 97 sites that we have, for communities encumbered by PFAS, I wonder, for those who have young children or elderly individuals in their home, will they pick Wisconsin? Will they pick our communities? That's what's at stake.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about environmental justice. Secretary, I know that it's been a top priority for you during your time leading the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and I wanted to ask, what does it mean to you, and what is DNR doing to protect marginalized communities from environmental threats?
Well, we know this for sure. In the state of Wisconsin, Black and brown folks and our tribal brothers and sisters and partners are often at the epicenter of environmental degradation, without question. Whether it's flooding, lead laterals, of course, close to 70,000 lead laterals here in the city of Milwaukee. And we know that for children, there is no safe level of lead in water. And so, we're hiring an environmental justice policy coordinator in the Department of Natural Resources. And that person will be working with, in the governor's office, the environmental justice lead. And that'll be coordinated with the Department of Administration and certainly our climate folks and our energy folks in the Department of Administration. So this position advises us accordingly in the DNR as to how we go about instituting where projects occur and who gets affected by projects. It could be a development, it could be a manufacturing center, it could be a roadway, whatever that is, we have to be eyes on so that we can protect those who are most often put upon. And so I'm happy that the governor has put a stake in the ground once again for the protection of folks who are more encumbered about environmental degradation, that they now, through the Department of Natural Resources, will have a voice. Because we have to go to those communities. We have to establish those relationships. We have to say we're here to help. We're going to do everything possible to protect communities of color and certainly communities that are impacted by degradation. And so I'm happy to say that when that position comes open, I'm expecting people in this room to apply. We're all looking for great jobs. And those impacts and compounds and existing systemic inequities impacting people where they live, work, and play, our responsibility at DNR is to give them a say.
And I know it's been a priority for the Biden-Harris administration as well. Could you tell us a little bit about what EPA is doing and what the administration is doing to prioritize environmental health in disadvantaged communities?
Sure, and it's great to hear from Secretary Cole that you've created this position. We look forward to working in partnership with you because all of the regions, including Region 5, are going to be hiring additional personnel to work on environmental justice. It's part of the funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, but EPA's $100 million commitment. There's a senior advisor to the administrator on environmental justice and a tool called EJ Screen that EPA has developed, again, that communities, individuals, others can use that take a range of factors to determine if a community has been underserved, overburdened, disproportionately affected by a range of environmental factors. Among the things that we're doing is engaging with the people we serve, because all too often people in a variety of communities have been disenfranchised, not listened to, and not able to participate in decisions that affect their own communities. And so, as Secretary Cole noted, among the very first things we're doing is listening. And I like a phrase that the disabled community uses, which is nothing about us without us. It means that the decisions that affect us, we need to be a part of that conversation and that planning and so on. We'll see there's a new guidance that's been released about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. This has been a tool that was available to EPA to use for many years, but it wasn't used, it wasn't deployed, and now there is a new and robust emphasis on how we can use that Title VI provision to make sure that communities are not disproportionately affected by various decisions. One of the things I spoke with the division directors when I first was appointed to this post, I said, we need to use every tool at our disposal to try to advance equity and justice. But what we're also discovering is we don't always have all the tools that we need. And to give you an example, many of the decisions involve permitting of a location for an asphalt plant or a metal shredding plant or some other industry that may have air emissions that flow across the fence line or flow across a political boundary. Those are zoning decisions made by an individual municipality that may well be at odds with a neighboring municipality. They're not decisions made by EPA or even at times by state partners that have that permitting authority. So we're trying through a new effort to conduct and work with states and local partners to conduct cumulative health impact assessments so that decisions aren't necessarily made on a single site-by-site basis, but we're beginning to look at the cumulative effect of a range of industries and sites on a resident population, and that will help determine decisions. And there's an example from the southeast side of Chicago that happened just earlier this year, where a metal shredding facility that was relocating from a more affluent, more white area of the north side of Chicago to a black and brown neighborhood that already had a great deal of industry and was challenged in terms of air emissions. And this cumulative health impact assessment was conducted by the Chicago Department of Public Health with consultation and some advice from our federal EPA, and the city decided not to grant an operating permit to that facility because of the cumulative health impacts. And I think we'll see more of that.
You get the sense that Deborah is certainly continues to carry the mantle, certainly for protection for those who have, a lesser voice in where things get cited. But as the regulator of regulators, I'm happy that, she is on it. And you get the sense that the EPA in this particular region, and I would imagine in other regions, are saying the same words to communities like this, to individuals like you, about how important it is for the regulator of regulators to hold cities and towns and villages accountable that may reside in Wisconsin or Illinois and Indiana and Minnesota and Michigan. And so I'm glad you're there.
Thank you.
Let's talk about climate change. It's the elephant in the room. It's been called the most pressing, top priority environmental issue of our era. and a regional or national approach seems best, given some of the fence line issues that you were just mentioning. Understanding that you're constrained by some of the things that previous administrations have done and that the courts have done and are doing, can you tell us a little bit about EPA's response and whether you're assisting communities in Wisconsin or elsewhere with resilience and adaptation measures for climate change?
The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that was passed last fall is a game changer in terms of the amount of resources that's going to be devoted to water, wastewater, and stormwater projects throughout the country. It's a once-in-a-lifetime, or certainly once-in-a-generation infusion of resources. And the law includes some parts that are more specific to climate change. For instance, an electric school bus grants and rebate program that's devoting $5 billion, and Region 5 is among the top regions that will receive these grants for electric school buses. This is to convert fleets from diesel buses that spew air pollution that's harmful for children and others in their respiratory health, that have emissions, into clean school buses. But my worry is that some of the infrastructure funding, as important as replacing lead service lines is for public health and for our economy, won't directly address climate change, and that some of the funding for water and wastewater utilities will go to aging infrastructure that desperately needs those resources to bring them up to 21st century standards, to provide the hardening that they may need. But I don't know if we'll be focusing on what the rest of the 21st century looks like. And so we really need to be working with our state partners to say, how can we look at the changing climate, the way we are having more intense storms here in the Midwest, less predictable? How can we use those funds to have a distributed network of water capture systems to keep it out of our aging sewers that can't handle that capacity? That's the promise and the hope for what we need to do.
Secretary Cole, if we bring it down to the state level, what is DNR doing on this front? Are you studying climate change in the Great Lakes? Are you working with communities on resilience and mitigation and adaptation? Can one state make a difference?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
Let me set the table. You know, if you read about Pakistan, it's 3 months. The last 3 months, every day is over 100 degrees. Did you see the house falling into the river on Yellowstone? We have to pay attention to climate. And my responsibility and my team's responsibility is to work with researchers, our own researchers, but those outside the organization, to advise us accordingly. We know Wisconsin is getting wetter. We know Wisconsin is less cold today. So if you have forestry practices, you know that you need overwintering for insects that harm our tree populations. Those temperatures have to be south of -30 to kill those populations. That's putting our forest industry. You know, we got 10 counties in the north that forestry is the #1 employer. We know that 15 years ago, if you had a pier on Lake Michigan, you couldn't even see the water. Now that water is lapping up on your doorstep in the back of your house. So these huge swings are pivotal, and that we have to pay attention to what it's showing us. Something is occurring relative to our climate. We know what's coming out of top of stacks in carbon is impacting not only our environment, certainly, but our ecosystem, and consequently, our economy. So you heard me talk about this nature-based outdoor economy. So WICI, Wisconsin Institute of Climate Change Initiatives, these are researchers that we work with. And in doing so, they've advised us that in the southwest part of the state where our trout streams are, those temperatures are warming. By 2050, we may not be able to see brook trout and other forms of trout in those cold water streams. people make their way to southwest Wisconsin to fish for trout. And in doing so, they stop at the fish tackle shop. They get the hotel room. They stop at the convenience store. They may even be so inclined to have one of Wisconsin's greatest beers and eat their cheese, right? But will they come when they can't see fish any longer in those cold water streams? So this economy that we count on is linked to what's going on in the environment. So we put our stake in the ground at the DNR when we first landed as well. We put climate change back on the DNR website. We talked about climate change and its impacts, while others chose to be silent. Well, I'm here to tell you I'm not going to be silent on climate change, nor our employees. So adaptation becomes important for us. So that energy we get from the researchers, we put it on our website and we tell people about it. I come to you and tell you there's things that we can do, but we have to be succinct in doing this. What's coming out of the end of the stacks, car emissions and the like are hurting not only our environment, but our economy. Will people make their way here? So the testament is, for the DNR, is to be the information giver for cities, towns, and villages, and thought leaders, elected officials, and others to make policy decisions that we go forward with. If offered, we will show up at a legislative review board and talk about what we're seeing in our climate. It'll be a robust conversation, I can assure you, and my responsibility is tell it early and often. You need only to go to the DNR website and type in climate change, and you will then begin to see the robustness of the work that researchers have done and our own staff have done.
Can I follow
Sure,
up?
please.
Let me just follow up, and that sounds terrific, Secretary Cole. You asked, what is EPA doing? One of the things that I want to try to pilot in Region 5 has to do with what you've heard President Biden and Gina McCarthy and Administrator Regan talk about, a whole of government approach, which is needed in addressing climate change. So I want to work with the other federal agencies that have regional offices based in Chicago, FEMA and HUD and others, to see if we can create some demonstration projects. Each of our agencies has resources to bring to bear. But in the past, when HUD would go into a home to try to do some energy efficiency projects, they weren't also looking at, does the basement flood in terms of stormwater management? They weren't also looking at whether there are urban street trees to capture stormwater, reduce the urban heat island effect, and provide benefits in terms of quality of life. They might have been looking at energy efficiency, energy efficient furnaces, but not necessarily low flow toilets and low flow shower heads to reduce water use and save energy and money. So how might we both build resilience, take out lead service line pipes, but also look at lead paint, protect public health, and improve quality of life by taking a whole of government approach? And my hope is we can develop some demonstration projects in a few underserved communities and maybe some tribal nations in Region 5, and I look forward to doing some of that here in Wisconsin.
Great to hear that you'd be working together on that issue, and that brings me to my next question, which is, Dean Kearney introduced us to this concept of cooperative federalism and the need for the states to work with EPA and the federal government. And I want to ask about that, about the working relationship between your agencies, and just to put it to a point, if you could ask Secretary Cole for one thing that would make your job easier, what would it be? And Secretary Cole, same question to you. If you could ask Regional Administrator Shore for one thing that would make your job easier in terms of working together, what would it be? So either one of you can address
Ladies
that
are always first.
Very good.
Oh, I feel like I'm too new in the role to answer that. We have a good, I think, positive cooperative relationship with Wisconsin, and that delegated authority from the federal government to the states is absolutely essential to our working partnership. And the reason is because states know their communities. They know what's needed in each municipality in terms of permitting, and they know the utilities in terms of inspections. And it is much better to have them with their local knowledge working on the ground in those communities. The federal government retains an oversight role, a funding role, and an assistance role. But I think that it differs from state to state how healthy that relationship is. I think with Wisconsin, we're doing well.
Fair enough. Secretary Cole.
Money, 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 money. Money. So, what EPA brings to the table through their resources is buying power for the states, without question. And that delegated authority that she was talking about is wastewater, stormwater, CAFO management. You were here in Wisconsin just a short time ago looking at CAFOs across the state of Wisconsin. I'm happy to report there is a lot of technology, water cleaning systems around CAFOs and manure management, so fingers are crossed some of that technology proves out. Certainly the work that we do, I should introduce Mike Thompson, who is our regional director, but also ran DNR's wastewater and wetlands program. So he is the expert in the room when it comes to delegated authority around everything water, from treatment systems and the like. So Mike, thank you for being here and all of your advice. And so we also have this energy around the Great Lakes, preventing and controlling invasive species, removing contaminated sediment. Certainly in Milwaukee, we're going to be, the sewage district is going to be creating that dewatering facility. We know that we have a couple other properties in the St. Louis estuary, in the northwest part of the state. We are linked at the hip with those funding streams, protecting fisheries and monitoring beaches, the like in terms of public safety. But the idea is we talk once a month as a region, and Deborah team leads that effort. And it's like anything else when you have a team. And I get to talk to Lisa Clark in Michigan. I get to talk to folks in Indiana. I get to talk to folks in here, the implementation, whether it's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, or what are they doing in terms of invasive species? What education are they giving to communities? I think Region 5 is tight. It's tight with the people, and it's certainly tight with the leadership. And we hear from the Washington office all the time, and it's usually good things, as you saw today in terms of EPA's new acknowledgement. And so there is no drama associated with the regulators and the regulators in this region talking it out. That is our calling card, and I'm happy to report I kind of look forward to those meetings. We look forward to those meetings because of the folks in this room and the communities in which we serve are looking for answers on a myriad of issues. So not only do I have 3,100 employees at the DNR that's pushing this ball uphill for clean air and clean water and managing our systems, but I also can count on other secretaries and directors across the upper Midwest to advise me accordingly as well. And that's a good place to be, folks. That is an absolutely good place to be. Thank you.
Good to hear that the relationship is strong. That hasn't always been the case, certainly from both directions, so I appreciate that. I do want to follow up on something that you mentioned, Secretary, and that's CAFOs and agriculture and the relationship between agriculture and environmental protection. Mm-hmm. And Wisconsin is historically a very agricultural state, but in places like Kewaunee County, that relationship has turned sour, and there is a lot of distrust of agriculture and CAFOs and the pollution that it may be causing in groundwater. And so I wanted to ask, can agriculture coexist with increased environmental protection? And you visited some of those sites recently. Regional Administrator, what are your thoughts on that relationship?
I think it's important that we're here at Marquette University, a Catholic institution, because I often think about what Pope Francis has called our common home, that we have a shared obligation, no matter what our religion, class, race, no matter what athletic team we pledge allegiance to care for that common home. And I think that we have seen in a number of arenas, water use, but also now in modern agriculture. And where we externalize to the environment the costs of production. And there needs to be a reckoning about that responsibility and that cost to the environment. Our Great Lakes are our commons, and so are our terrestrial habitat in some ways. And I'm not sure yet how we do that, but what I've learned about the Maumee watershed in Ohio, which feeds into the western end of Lake Erie, which has harmful algal blooms that have led to do not drink orders for Toledo, a town of 400,000 people in the past. Toxic bacteria that affects humans and the aquatic environment. 80% increase in concentrated animal feeding operations in the Maumee watershed in the last decade. The Director of Agriculture in Ohio says that 85% of the nutrient loading into the western basin of Lake Erie is from agriculture. But I don't think agriculture is yet assuming the costs of that 80% loading. We may see some technological innovations, both in terms of treating, or I'd want to see more in the way of anaerobic digesters on site. We may be able to trace loading from farm fields to its source through modern technology, I don't know, so that that responsibility becomes clear. But it's a challenge, and it's a social challenge. It's also an element of political will.
Secretary Cole, your thoughts on agriculture and its relationship with the environment?
Well, let me take us down this memory lane, an unfortunate memory, but a memory nonetheless. So as a new manager in Public Works, I'm brought into the circumstance where torrential rains up in the northwest part of the state, where these CAFOs reside, those torrential rains led to an immense amount of manure runoff into the tributaries and consequently into the rivers and consequently into Lake Michigan. So if you're one of the communities that have your water supply pipe in Lake Michigan at that time, you're going to get cryptosporidium. Milwaukee had cryptosporidium. And so it still resonates as America's, largest waterborne death. 104 people died. While at the same time, Milwaukee Water Works was changing its organophosphates and settling out types of technology. That technology is changed. It's a $400 million ozonization process in Milwaukee, one of the better attributes that came out of all of this. So with that reminder, we have to work with agriculture. We cannot leave agriculture behind when it comes to the technology and the innovations, whether it's pathogens in the water, nitrates in the water, and the like. Systems have to change, and systems continue to evolve. We created at the DNR the Office of Agriculture and Water because we have to talk about this new technology, new advents and what they're doing. If you had to do it all over again, would you put the state's largest CAFOs on land which sits atop karst topography, limestone. Cross-section, it looks like Swiss cheese, right? So folks in the northeast part of the state have had brown water days, not like this. We know that leaky septic systems are also to blame in some of those communities. But if you live there, what is your house worth today? These connections around environmental protections and the economy of the state of Wisconsin, whether it's housing, our nature-based economy, where people live, where communities locate, where businesses locate, are important. I mean, you've seen in the newspaper while people come to Wisconsin to put big buildings up and manufacturing centers, well, it's going to be a host of people who move and live here. They also go through a myriad of environmental analysis as to where they're going to locate their company, because the people who are going to work inside those buildings have to find a home here. Those connections are important for the state of Wisconsin. So we know that pathogens in waters and nitrates, and so nitrates, for all practical purpose, I should tell you I'm an FFA kid out of southwestern Michigan, right? So I have a love for agriculture, but the agriculture in southwestern Michigan is tart cherries, peaches, apples, blueberries, blackberries, and the like, right? But I should tell you that, it was my parents who migrated from Mississippi and Texas during that great move to the north, right? And what they brought was this ideology about agriculture, but also the protections. You didn't see anybody in the Cole family putting any type of chemicals on our vegetable garden, because our parents would say it's going to wind up in your body. Let's not do that. And so as the youngest, I was the one that was responsible for tending to that acre of fields. But all around us, soybean and corn every other year rotated, and lots of chemicals being put on the land. So we stopped drinking from our well when I was a freshman in high school. And so I always tell people, how do you live on bottled water? Well, you merely only ask the folks in the town of Campbell in French Island, Peshtigo, Marinette. We're better than this, right? So nitrogen, when you put it on the land, plants, like corn, only need it for a short window, a very, very short window. The more you put on outside that window, it's going to wind up in the soil, in our riverways, and then you see all of these green blossoms and blue-green algae in our lake systems. Again, when people recreate and they show up at the pond with their towel over their arm and their basket, and they see these big plumes, they get in their car, they go back home. So, human health implications for sure, the timing for sure, that agricultural industries have to evolve, and as I've said earlier, I get to see some of the newest technology that's being talked about. But when you got 5,000 to 7,000 animals in a combined space, and your manure management program, whether you're spreading on frozen ground, which is not allowed any longer, or where do you get rid of it? Because manure keeps coming, right? And so we have a responsibility to, as an agency, to work with the agricultural community, because they're not going away. And the folks that I talk to, certainly up in Kewaunee County, I think the courts were right. We got to put monitoring wells in those systems. So they allowed us to put monitoring wells so we can pay attention. Because if you don't know what it looks like 5 feet below the ground, then you don't have enough information to make regulatory changes or operational changes. But I'm excited what the future holds, because the conversations that I have with agriculture are, we want to be responsible. But we also run a business. And that nexus, folks, is where the DNR lies. Thank you.
We've got about 9 minutes left. I want to open things up for questions from the audience, even though I've got a lot more that I'd like to ask. So I would just ask you to keep your questions short and to the point, wait to be recognized. And if you can, if you're sitting in the front portion of the room, press down on the button on the microphones in front of you. That will help us hear you. Yes, sir.
My mission these days is to bring forth and call attention to drawdown to address climate change as a way of setting a framework, creating 100 actions to address climate change and equity. My question actually to all three of you, thank you for being here, first of all, but my question to all three of you actually is, have you heard of drawdown? And if not, would you go back and take a look at it? Maybe have your staffs. It provides a framework for addressing climate change.
Thank you. I'm going to briefly restate the question for those who are following along online. And I think it goes to groundwater drawdown and how it relates to... Not groundwater.
It's actually carbon in the atmosphere.
Carbon
to
drawdown.
address climate change.
You mean technological means of removing carbon from the atmosphere?
Technological, social, a whole variety of things, 100 different solutions.
Okay. Any familiarity with drawdown?
Well, certainly the folks that we work with at Wiki have a robust menu of all types of options. This is certainly in the mix. So they would have to advise us accordingly. It's seemingly that this technology, these opportunities are in the early stages of development, but everything's should be on the table going forward.
I'm familiar with drawdown, and each of the EPA regions has been preparing a climate adaptation plan as well as a larger agency-wide climate change plan. I'd like to go back and look at which elements of that plan actually speak to drawdown in a number of different arenas.
Yes.
It says push.
I can restate it. Go ahead.
The DNR has always been our friend. I grew up on a farm near Wisconsin Dells, and yet twice we have had to sue the DNR, and this, I need some answers from you, sir. Remember when Perrier Nestle's came in, they were given a permit to drill 500 gallons of water a minute free forever without an environmental impact statement. That was in Adams County, no zoning. On the other side was Newport, Columbia County. I had 160 acres of wetland my dad gave me 50 years ago. He said, never drain or settle. It's for the future. And yet DNR gave Nestle's a permit without an environmental impact statement. Well, we got all of the Republicans, the Democrats, the born-again Christians, the atheists, they all knew we needed water.
I've got to ask you to,
sued and we won.
But that's get to the question.
My immediate question is, why did you, at the DNR, give a permit to that huge hog farm in the driftless area where it was shown, technically it was shown scientifically that the clay would not hold back all of that manure, and that would go into the Kickapoo Valley, into the river, and it would pollute the entire area, driftless area.
I'm going to have
That's sinful. Why did you do that?
Thank you for your question, and I certainly understand your concern. So in Wisconsin, statutes dictate what DNR can and do when it comes to, cannot do when it comes to CAFOs. The CAFO laws are robust. And so that being said, the Roth Feeder Pig 2 is what I assume you're referring to. Yes. So again, laws in the state of Wisconsin really dictate what the DNR can and cannot do. That's why you see in this northeast part of the state, a myriad of CAFOs. Well, the law allows for that. If they meet these types of standards, we cannot deny those permits. literally cannot deny those permits. And so if we do, we're going to wind up getting sued. Now, after this, you, myself, and Mike can have a conversation. I do remember the Perrier issue, but I don't think I was born then. And I do remember it, but I don't think I was around. But Mike and I can certainly talk one-on-one with you he can certainly frame that up. I'm sure Mike was around during that period, so thank you for the question. Thank you. Got it.
We're gonna have to go to the next person.
I got you.
We'll talk after.
I hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
Thanks again for your talk today. I had a question about the combination of environmental justice and then upcoming PFAS regulations. So it's encouraging that there's more research on the toxicity of PFAS, but I was kind of curious about where the responsibility falls on implementing advanced treatment technologies as well as advanced analytical technologies. Because one of the big things with environmental justice is that the communities most heavily impacted also have the least resources to solve them. So there's some regulations that have been around for decades, like disinfection byproducts, that aren't quite solved. So I was wondering if the funds for both monitoring PFAS to know they're there frequently and then implementing most of the advanced technology we have to date to remove them from water, if that would fall more on the state or federal or the municipality itself, and how that's aligned with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law.
Thank you for the question. So the question goes to, I think I'll try to do this as best I can, who is going to bear the costs of removing PFAS from our waters? Is that money going to come from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or will it come from those responsible for putting the PFAS in the water? Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Also, the frequent monitoring.
And monitoring as well.
Where we can identify the source of PFAS, that, for instance, manufacturers, already EPA and others have been holding companies like DuPont, 3M, Chemours responsible for the costs of cleanup. And many of the sources of contamination are on Defense Department installations, Air Force bases, and so on. Defense Department has not been an eager or willing partner in cleanup, but we're working with them. And they are doing some things at some sites. Where there's legacy contamination, eventually PFAS may be able to be part of a Superfund program. I believe later this week, 2 of the substances will be listed as hazardous substances and thus be eligible for consideration for brownfields remediation and so on. But in addition, there's significant new injection of funds for monitoring of emerging contaminants in the infrastructure law, making funds available right now to pay for that sampling that will show us where PFAS are and in what levels that can lead to remediation and action. There's significant federal funding that can flow through the states and to underserved communities in particular.
I would say ditto, and I don't say it in jest. It's, if we know where it emanates from, those are what we call the responsible parties, right? Those responsible parties have to clean it up. New technology from membranes to reverse osmosis have shown positive attributes. Certainly the idea of monitoring wells to know where it is and where it's not. So the DNR certainly has been working with cities, towns, and villages to test systems, water supply systems, so that they know what those numbers are in their own community. And so I think Deborah answered the question succinctly. If we know who they are, then we're gonna go touch them, and then they'll have to be responsible for that.
So we're out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank you all for being here. We've had events in snowstorms and rainstorms, but this is the first one in 95-degree heat. So thanks for braving the heat to be here today. We couldn't do this without you. But most of all, I want to thank Regional Administrator Shore and Secretary Cole. Please join me.